Yes, welcome to everybody to this webinar of the participation working group of the CCM cluster. The webinar of today is on women participation and leadership in the Rohingya refugee response. So many of you knows me. I'm Giovanna Federici. I'm the Global Camp Management Advisor for the Norwegian Refugee Council. And here with me, facilitating this webinar, there is Amalia Torres. Amalia, if you want to wave. And Ashrin Kanesan. Ashrin, if you want to wave. They are IOM CCM Global Support Team focusing on the Women Participation Project. So I'm really happy and pleased to see that there are so many participants. So we will not, since we are so many, will be a bit of a challenge to hear from each of you. So I suggested to write on the common chat your name, where are you working, the organization, and if you're engaged in a CCM response or others. If you can show, I mean, if you can keep the camera on and just at least for a few seconds, just so we can have at least like an initial greeting. I can see only a few of you. I see from Bazar there is, you are many. And yeah, if any other would like to, hi, I see Joe, would like that just to show the face, just to have an initial greetings. Just before I hand over to Ashrin and then to Megan, just a couple of words about this working group. Maybe most of you are familiar with it. So the CCM participation working group was created last year, and it's currently chaired by IOM and NRC. The objective of the working group is to share, lesson learned, best practice, consolidation of tools, but then also build, synergies and connection with other, outside of the CCM in relation to the same topics. This one is the second webinar. We had the first webinar in November, where Anna Isholam presented the findings and the recommendation of the research that was conducted last year on the women engagement in humanitarian coordination. So this is so this is our second webinar, and I'm really glad to see that all of you could join. And just, I already wrote in the chat, if you can just keep the mic on. When otherwise I will mute you because I can do it, but if you can remember just to keep the mic off and just put it on when you need to speak. And good, so then I think I will hand over to Ashrin so that we'll introduce you, give a short introduction about the presentation of today. Then after the presentation we will have a moment for discussion and questions, but yeah, we will see.
Okay, thank you, Giovanna. Thank you everyone for taking the time out from your busy schedules to attend the webinar. Today we have the great opportunity to listen to Megan, Denise Smith, who is head of GBV programming at IOM Cox's Bazar. And today she'll be presenting on key lessons, achievements, challenges, and cross-cutting issues of the Women's Committee in the Leda Makeshift Camp. So over to you, Megan.
Thanks. I'll only put the video for the beginning because I'm getting notifications that my connection is very weak. But hello, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. I've been working with IOM Cox's Bazar since the beginning of this project in 2018, which was a pilot for the Rohingya refugee response, focused on improving camp management with the aim to mitigate and reduce the risks of gender-based violence. So that project has really evolved over the last 2 years in Bangladesh, and today will be a brief snapshot of the project and some highlights, but we do have a full learning report that we can share with you after the webinar. Okay, shall I go ahead and share my screen? Yeah, okay. So let me just, okay. Okay. Okay, you can see, fine? Yeah, thumbs up? Okay, great. Then I'm gonna make a start. Maybe, Shireen, you can just maybe wave to me when I'm maybe 5 minutes left. Okay, so this project's really evolved over the last 2 years in Bangladesh and provides some foundations for similar interventions in camp and camp-like settings. So for the project, Leda and Ali Kali makeshift sites, camps 24 and 25 in Teknaf were selected due to the mixed demographics in these areas. These camps are close to each other and include a mixed population of Rohingya refugees from the previous exodus, new arrivals from the 2017 influx, as well as Bangladeshi host communities. Given its close proximity to the Myanmar border, there are also many related protection risks and hazards in this area, such as drugs, kidnappings, and human trafficking, as well as natural disasters. Oh, I just got a notification the connection is weak. Can everyone still hear me? Yeah, thumbs up? Great, okay. Here you can see the block and the sub boundaries of the project sites. Leadership and camp management structures has been somewhat ad hoc due to the chaotic influx in 2017. New geographically based camp block level leadership structures emerged with Majis, these appointed community Rohingya leaders, playing a key role in camp management, and the government appointed CICs, or camps in charges, are also responsible for the camp administration. So it's quite top down with notably little participation from women. The population breakdown is summarized below, which shows that approximately 80% of the total population are Rohingya, while only 20% are Bangladeshi. There's often competition over common resources like land and water and food, shelter, firewood, which often results in intercommunal conflict and violence, as well as risks of gender-based violence in particular. The situation becomes increasingly worse during monsoon and cyclone season, when many households unsure of where they'll find fuel, water, and other basic resources. So we wanted to better mitigate protection risks, and also given that the camp governance structure in this area has been historically very top-down, we proceeded with a baseline study to establish the existing levels of women's participation. So the project was designed around 3 key pillars. One was disaster risk reduction and emergency preparedness and response, focused on vulnerable groups. Since it was monsoon season, this took chief priority. Establish a functioning camp management or governance structure inclusive of women. And then the third pillar was a livelihoods component, but due to the emergency response efforts, as well as government restrictions, this would be later in the second phase of the program. So like any community-led consultative process where the process itself determines the outcome, it was difficult to concretely explain to the women what engagement would look like. It started to take shape through just continuous consultations at community level and in the women and girls safe spaces, which are this kind of community center in the area for women and girls to access services and information. And through the use of participatory tools adapted from the Women in Displacement Toolkit, adapted for our setting. So through regular household engagement, particularly with like husbands, other male leaders, including imams, camps in charges, teachers, parents, and existing committees, it was agreed by
Megan, we cannot hear you. Megan?
now.
Yeah, lost you for a few seconds.
Oh, wait, what was the last thing you caught? Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Amalia, can you hear Megan?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, no worries. Just wave me if I suddenly go off. The connection might be spotty. So through regular household engagement with husbands and other male leaders, including imams and camps in charges, teachers and parents and existing camp committees, it was agreed by all that the structure of this would ultimately be a women's committee inspired by an existing pattern development structure to ensure that there would be women focal points for each block. And site management also introduced the sectoral focal point structure to ensure smooth coordination with service providers in the camps who are also organized by sectors. We were fortunate enough to have this Women and Girls Safe Space as a kind of entry point for interaction with the community, which acted as a hub in terms of regular contact and follow-up with women and girls, and was key in helping us better understand their needs and address the barriers to participation. Here you can see some on the slide around access to information, decision-making, and safety. The beneficiary selection process was agreed upon by the women interested in joining the committee through the safety of the Women and Girls Safe Space and by IOM facilitators who could ensure that everyone's voices and concerns were heard. This was quite a learning curve since these women had never participated in any type of selection process before, as they were not allowed to have such committee structures in Myanmar. So it was an entirely new experience for them. Rohingya women also made the very specific request for the establishment of a quota system in the committee to ensure a balance of power between the three different groups: Rohingyas who arrived before 2017, Rohingyas who arrived in or after 2017, and the host community. And there was consensus of this approach more widely with all stakeholders in the community. After the selection process was completed, a skills assessment was conducted to decide who would form the core group and also appoint the women as focal points for the sector they had the most knowledge of or interest in. Each block would have a representative from each sector. And the next slide, I'll show you the existing and current structure of the committee, which was launched in 2018. So, excuse the bit of a convoluted slide here, but the committee brings together 110 women leaders into a platform that's recognized by the community, by the camp in charge, and the Majis, or community leaders. They're responsible for representing the interests of women and girls in a fair and impartial way within Leda and Ali Kali. Participation is purely voluntary and does not involve compensation. Rather, we provide training and skill building opportunities and support in getting the platform established. Later, there would be a more self-reliance livelihood component, but again, this was later in project. Also later on in the project, this started as 100 members and then later actually included 10 women with disability later in the project. So because the structure of the committee is designed as sectoral and service-oriented, it sets them apart from the rest of the committees in the camp, who have a focal for shelter, NFI, wash, protection, nutrition, education, communicating with communities, etc. And they then got thematic training from the sector focal points as well in their thematic area, whether it's wash, NFI, protection, etc. So this allowed them to better participate in monitoring services in the camp, conducting referrals, disseminating useful information back to the community, and bridged the gap between the community and service providers. So here you can see just training on the sectoral logos, and also here you can see a little bit more on fire safety training, service monitoring, training around emergency preparedness and response activities. Now, a gap was identified early on in the project as we were doing training on emergency preparedness and response around disability. Members of the Women's Committee alerted site management and protection teams on the households and caregivers with disabilities and advocated for us to take action. They were aware of households and community members that we were not, and they also wanted to include these women with disability in the core committee representation. So the inclusion of these women has really served as a key link to better identify and support persons with disabilities more broadly in the community and ensure their specific needs are considered in camp management. And here is just a photo of a consultation from the with the support of the protection team and women's committee, women with disability were consulted and included in the development of evacuation plans. Women's committee members targeted them in early warning response mechanisms, like communication, understanding flag signals, sectoral logos in the camps, muster points for families, cyclone shelters, and ensuring specialized assistance to persons with mobility issues in particular. So their advocacy for inclusion also compelled us as protection and site management teams here at IOM to bring this issue up at the interagency level. So now we do have an age and disability working group in Cox's Bazar, and we have strengthened our engagement with disability organizations in the response. So upon the recommendations from the Women's Committee, we were able to really facilitate inclusion in the committee through the distribution of assistive devices, or sometimes support to caregivers, for example, to accompany the 10 women of disability who were committee members to the training. Okay, let me just jump ahead. This is just a snapshot of the process in setting up the project in 2018. The beginning was more around training, capacity development of our own field teams, selection criteria, community engagement. We carried on with training of the Women's Committee members and coaching and supporting them, and the formal launch of the committee was in September. The Women's Committee has really proven itself as a key platform for social cohesion between Rohingya and host community. Interaction has increased so much between Rohingya and host community women beyond the committee. I think at the beginning there was a certain apprehension and fear, common fears of stealing husbands or animosity between landlords and neighbors were very common in the beginning. But through the increased interaction and sharing in the mixed training and capacity development, particularly around emergency response at the beginning, we saw this better fostered and more inter-community dialogue, at least between the women that were in our facilities. A really great example in the project, I think, is that women-headed households, both Rohingya and Bangladeshi, had serious safety concerns when it came to their children. For example, there were a lot of open pits and ponds in the camps, and one child had died after falling into one. And as a result of their discussions around this common concern, they came up with the idea to fence the pits and ponds off and advocated with site management to take action. So it was their shared achievement to ensure safety for all children in the community, and they really got buy-in, and it promoted more inter-community dialogue more broadly. I think they take very seriously their role as disseminators. Also in the committee, you do have Rohingya women who do not really have a written script in terms of language, and it's for example, in some of the training of trainers, it was difficult to learn through images and memorizing all the information through these participatory activities. And then with some of the Bangladeshi women who had a little bit more literacy, I think they really stepped up and provided a lot more peer support to make sure that everyone in the committee was able to facilitate this training and that they understood the concepts and they were able to at least sign their name in meetings. So it really became a peer network of support. Women's participation initially began around disaster risk reduction and emergency preparedness and response, which I think helped pave the way for women to take on more leadership roles in the community. Women's committee members also started to find more common ground building from this foundation in protection, site management, emphasizing that certain protection categories were essential, regardless if they're Rohingya or host community. Persons with disabilities living in a flood or a landslide risk area had been neglected by humanitarian actors previously. It doesn't matter if you're Rohingya host community, if you live in this flood-prone area, it's a common risk, like the dangerous pit that kids could fall into. And it's a way to really unite the community around common causes. So how to build the foundation? It can start with a common concern, and we find capacity building efforts that jointly address the needs of both groups. Cyclone preparedness, child caring, safety, beginning on a foundation of common barriers and challenges as a woman in camp life is a really effective entry point to foster integration. And even more when you start to focus on specific groups like female-headed households or widows or mothers or adolescents. So there's been a discernible shift in women's participation. I think it's a more enabling environment for women and girls in Leda and acceptance in their roles from the community. There are promising indicators in terms of feedback and complaints from women in the feedback and information centers at camp level, and increased visibility overall. So I think the Women's Participation Project has laid a framework for other dimensions of women's support going forward, and that includes creating space for women's participation in camp governance that fosters social cohesion. Women interact and coexist across TechNaf communities in accessing common services like water, health, and markets. So incorporating female involvement in camp governance and service delivery will enhance accountability and address issues of access. Okay, so this project, I guess, as well as other ones, really on the global level, and the link here to the platform, you can poke around and see other countries that have rolled this out. It's provided a really strong evidence base and foundation for women's participation, empowerment, and self-reliance with a protection focus. And at least our interventions, and I know of others, have also been inclusive of women with disabilities who have been working to promote inclusive engagement in the daily care and maintenance of the camp and disaster preparedness and response, and have served as potential models that can be scaled up across the response. So we're currently replicating this model now going into 2020 in other camps, and I'm sure we'll have also more learnings to share, but I think I've done enough talking. So I'll hand over to Ashireen.
Hi, actually, Amalia will be speaking now.
Oh, sorry there.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you very much for this comprehensive presentation. Now we're going to open the time for questions because we're a very big group of people. May I ask you to write your questions on the chat if you have any, and then we will give you the floor to ask the question. It can be a question, or if you want to share also reflection or experience on the work you do in your country with women's committees or participation of women in camp governance structures also. It's the time to make it. Okay, I do have a question, so then maybe we can start by this one. Megan, my question is around what was the acceptance from the formal camp management structure, like the existing ones of the women's committees? Were there any challenges? Did you face any challenge in this regard? And if so, how did you overcome these challenges?
Unmute first of all. Okay. So in the formal camp management structure, like the Majis system of or like the community leaders, the acceptance from the community leaders of the women's committee, yeah? Okay. Yeah, well, actually, we do normally face more challenges for more, I guess, conservative Majis and community leaders generally in other activities. But for this particular project, we had anticipated more community backlash. I think we anticipated more community backlash, and we were trying very carefully to mitigate it from the beginning. So we did do a key stakeholder mapping, and we found some influential imams actually who were able to be help negotiate more buy-in, particularly from husbands. I'd say rather than the formal camp management structure or Majis or community leaders, it was more the husbands that were the barrier. And I think that we're in early consultations with women, they kept emphasizing we would need to get permission from their husband, or if they were widows, they need permission from the son. So still, these were challenges to overcome, and we basically did this through targeted mobilization and checking in on them constantly throughout the project, giving them a shared ownership of the project to some degree. Like when we did the baseline study, we presented the findings to the imams and the community leaders and had just continuous engagement with them through every step in setting up the project.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Very interesting to see the challenges came more from the husband than the actual camp management structures. I see in the chat, Jennifer has a question. Jennifer, I'll give you the floor to you.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Excuse me. So I was wondering about how a smaller camp management team could maybe take on the task of improving women's participation. You know, Cox's Bazar is so impressive in so many ways and has a really large, you know, women's protection team that's helping out the SMS team. But is it possible to do, you know, improving women's participation with a methodology like this with a smaller camp management team? And maybe that's kind of for the panel, not just for Cox's Bazar.
No, that's an excellent question. If I can just speak to that briefly, and then maybe the panel can jump in. Yes, absolutely. We are quite fortunate here to have dedicated specialized teams. That said, we were a smaller group, I think, involved in this pilot. But that said, the Women in Displacement Toolkit, what's great about it is even if you would pair up with, let's say, a different agency or organization, a different protection actor or GBV service provider, to just have the protection lens or added value of, I think, a GBV specialist as well to help facilitate these sessions. I think what works really, you don't need massive teams. You know, we are like over 32 in protection here, but you really just need mixing up the site management and protection teams or comprehensive capacity building and protection. I mean, it is a pillar of site management anyway of your teams. So in the beginning, actually, because we didn't have a lot of staff to dedicate to this project specifically because it was monsoon season and we were so busy with our normal operations, we did have our GBV coordinator paired up with the site management teams, coaching, providing training, and relevant thematic areas, and just co-facilitating some of the sessions. But I imagine you could really, it would be interesting to do this working with different service providers, maybe outside of one's organization, to build on their expertise. And same with disability organizations as well. Even if you wouldn't have, say, a disability specialist working within your organization, I think it's a good opportunity for coordination with those actors outside your organization to work with them.
All right, thank you, Megan. Somebody else wants to intervene in this question? Okay. Otherwise, I have another question from Christy. Christy, the floor is yours to ask the question.
Hello. I'm not sure if my audio works.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, good. Hi, everyone. Thanks for that excellent presentation. There's a lot of curiosity as well from us about the achievements of this Women Participation Project, and I think that you did a very excellent work. I'm just curious because there's one slide that mentioned about the Majis largely steers the decision making, and I want to know if there is some concrete examples where women were able to influence the decision making made by the Majis on project adjustments. So not just FGDs or participatory activities, but really to make a valuable influence to decision making. This is only because to avoid previous experiences where frustrations can increase because of the concept of they participate, we decide. So that kind of predicament. And what do you think should be the priority moving forward in order to strengthen the influence of women, to make women participation have a significant value to the decision-making processes made by the Majis? Thank you.
Great, this is a very interesting question. Yes, so, well, there's a couple things. With the Majis, it's a little complicated because actually many of the camp management, the camp governance structures, and like these para-development committees and whatnot have been established to kind of counterbalance the power of the Majis. So in a way, I think we've been trying to phase out this system a little bit. But I mean, the point remains with male leaders, particularly in these forums. So like when in the beginning, I think when we were seeing the women rallying around the pit, right, to fill in for their children, which was a safety concern, that got them a lot of buy-in from the community leaders, actually. And same with the identification of persons of disabilities. I think in the beginning, they were trying to understand, okay, well, what will the women really do? And what will the contributions be? Of course, the women's perspective is important, but then what will the contribution really be? And then I think in the beginning, when we really scaled up the training and they got more confident to voice their concerns, I think the proof was in the pudding. And then finally, I think a lot of the community leaders were really playing a supportive role and listening more than they were before. And I think what you
Megan?
Development community structure, and with these sectoral focal points, it allows for more interaction. It's not just, okay, a couple of women are in the room in a meeting, but they have their counterpoints in the other committees, right? So of wash and shelter. Is it back? You can hear me? Okay. So it's about inclusion in the existing camp management structures and not necessarily the individual and the individual male community leaders accepting that. And that takes some careful negotiation at the beginning. I'd say including women or including women of disabilities or persons of disabilities or any group that is typically excluded in camp management, including them in the existing structure and having really spaces for meaningful participation, giving them the skills. For example, women became a lot more vocal when they were able to feel like they could sign their name in the meeting. Before, when they couldn't sign
Only for Megan or for everybody? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Giovanna, but I can't hear Megan anymore.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Oh, wait, here, I just muted.
You're back, Megan, you're back.
Megan, you have to repeat because we lost you around 1 minute or 30 seconds, I don't know.
Oh no, sorry. Yeah, let me just think how to summarize. Yeah, I think generally the buy-in was including, I mean, when you include women or women of disability, person with disability, anybody would be marginalized in camp life, camp-like settings. To get buy-in, I mean, really in the beginning, you need to create the spaces for interaction, not for them just to be sitting in the room and, okay, there are some women in this camp coordination meeting. It's like we actually need to include them standing agenda item, inclusion in the decision-making that the para-development committee structure will do. So by not building something completely parallel and completely bizarre, different from the existing structures we had in the camp, I think we were able to really create a space for that. And then with the capacity building and training in the beginning, I think, for example, something small of them being able just to sign the name in the meeting made them a lot more confident and vocal to be able to speak up a little bit more. And we had a lot of really supportive imams who would also counter maybe some of the more negative male leaders in the community as well. So we kind of built like an alliance of key supporters and allies. And really, I think the structure, the sectoral structure as well, gave them a role and an added value in the community, because then they were the ones who conducting referrals, who had the very valuable information and disseminating this information, who were filling in a pit and identifying solutions to challenges and issues in the community that actually the Para Development Committee was unable to. Oh no, it said my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me, or did I go out again? Yeah, good, okay, good. Wait. Oh, did you catch it? No.
I did hear the answer. Thank you, Megan. Can you hear me, guys? Okay, so I see we have another question from our colleague Ingrid from Cox's Bazar. Ingrid, all yours, the mic.
Sorry, Amalia. I lost you. Yeah, so it was just a comment from site management team on the question about how do you implement, I think it was Jennifer's question, like if you have a small camp management team. So what we did here, if we don't have a dedicated, but we have a team, so it was incorporated actually as part of the core priority of SM. So our teams were working aside from the other pillars of site management. So it was integrated. Although one mission in the Philippines when this project was piloted in 2015, because it was a very small team, we hired at that time like enumerators, which were like 10 enumerators who got the training, capacity building, and who helped in the project. At the same time, later on in engaging with the women in trainings and capacity building activities. So yeah, so those are two examples that we can add to the question on how we manage the project. So incorporating at the same time hiring a dedicated team.
Thank you, Ingrid, for your addition. We have another question from Ash. Ash, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Okay, so my question is about like, has the creation of the women's committees had an impact on the relationship between the Rohingya community and the host community? And has it positively contributed to social cohesion in the camp?
Yeah, well, I think there's certainly promising indications, but we do need a little bit more time to see how it develops. But I think social cohesion, we've started to see a lot more with the second phase of the project, working more with our transition and recovery department and IOM, more livelihoods on the livelihoods component. So now we've been doing with Rohingya and host community women, training in food processing and tailoring, and so it's been progressing, and I think it wouldn't have been possible without the initial foundation that we built with the Women's Committee in the beginning. But the structure itself has really been great, though, because of the quote, the system representation. I think it's a step in the right direction, and we talk about that as well. So I'll let that be for the next report we have once we finish this next phase of the Women's Participation Project here, but it looks promising, we think so.
Okay, thank you, Megan. I see Giovanna has asked a question on safety perception.
Yeah, so my question was a bit around if the perception of safety from the women has improved with the increasing participation with increasing participation in the camp governance structures?
Oh, it's a complex answer. Actually, because I mean, this is a very particular area of in the Rohingya refugee response. So I was mentioning before, we have a very complex protection environment there. And so I think people generally still, and especially women and girls, don't really feel safe is the answer. But I think in regards to your question, in terms of the increased participation in camp governance structures, I think through the safe spaces, we see a lot more women and girls coming forward to voice complaints and feedback. They're feeling more confident, they're feeling more comfortable than to link with the Women's Committee, to share information, to receive information, and to, but I mean, in terms of, I mean, we still have a lot of girls, adolescent girls, for example, who don't still need a chaperone to walk with a group of them to take them to the women and girls safe space, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of risks and hazards in this area. There are the issues around the wash facilities, lack of lighting. We actually have the highest caseload of protection cases in TechNAF. So it's a really challenging area, but I think it's a good opportunity and entry point. I mean, at least now, in some of the areas of the camp where women and girls don't feel safe, they're now flagging these to the Women's Committee to try to make some changes, and maybe eventually we do create a much more safer environment. The Women's Committee members themselves too, I see them going through the biggest transformation actually. They're so much more confident, so much more forthcoming in events and different community level consultations we do. So I think their perception of safety has improved, but maybe not all the women and girls served in that area.
Thank you, Megan. Very, very interesting.
Thank you, Megan. I just mentioned in the chat, I think we have time to take one more question if there's any. So you can write it in the chat if you have a question. Okay. Okay, so it looks like there are no more questions. So, well, thank you very much for your participation in this productive discussion. Despite the connection problems, I think it was very engaging and very interesting. So maybe before closing, I would like to, there's a question. So giving the floor to Riyadh that has a question. Can the person that wrote there's a question speak? Otherwise you can type it and I cannot read it if the connection doesn't allow you to speak. Okay, I think you are unmuted, but we can't hear you. So maybe if you want to type the question, I can read it. Okay, so maybe I'm gonna continue with what was about to say, and then the moment the question comes in, we can address it. So I was saying that we're planning to have another webinar in late April or early May, where we'd like to present on disability inclusion. So in that sense, we would like to know if some of you has an example of project or initiative on disability inclusion that you would like to present during this webinar. So you can let us know right now, or you can let us know after the webinar. Okay. So in any case, you can let us know this in bilateral to the participation in this placement working group later. Also, another thing we're interested to know. I see the question. Okay, I think I'm gonna read the question. So the question is related to the wings part of the project you mentioned. So does this project improve the life of the beneficiaries, or does the rest of women also benefit from the project? So I'm giving the floor to Megan.
Yeah, no, I would say it benefits actually the whole community, and not just women and girls. Talking about livelihoods in Bangladesh is a little bit challenging because there are so many restrictions, and what we can do with host community is different from Rohingya. So this was quite a small pilot. I mean, we're talking a beneficiary group of 460, if I'm not mistaken. But I mean, what we saw from after they got the training, capacity building in food processing, tailoring, and sewing, that they've kept up the skills. They are selling to. They are preparing and selling to out of their shelters to neighbors and making things in the community, working with their communities that live beside them. So I say definitely, and also Wings is a kind of unique project because of the beneficiary types of the old Rohingya and Rohingya host community served by this. But at the same time, in the women and girls safe space, we were also trying to do the soft skill building constantly. So then, yeah, I mean, you could say everyone in the community is kind of benefiting from the skill building training. Oh, the sound up. Skill building training, but then the problem is the access to market. So I guess the market linkage is the more challenging part, but in terms of benefits being learning a new skill and improving these life skills and vocational training, then yes.
Okay, thank you, Megan. I think Bunny, who's the person who actually asked the question, I'm not sure, like they could hear the entire answer. What I'm suggesting maybe is like maybe later in bilateral we can address this question, if that's okay for everyone. Okay, so is there any other last minute question? Okay. I'm gonna take this as a no. So I was saying that, so in addition of like asking you if somebody would be interested in presenting a project on disability inclusion in the coming webinar, we're also interested in knowing if there are any particular topics you would like to see addressed in future webinars. So again, this is something you can mention right now, but also let us know later. You will have the email of the participation in this placement working group, so don't hesitate to address or come to us suggesting new topics for future webinars, but also topics that you would like to see discussed in the participation in displacement working group session in this year's CCCM Global Retreat, okay? So we are open to suggestions. We are starting to plan for this too, so please come to us with any suggestion or topic that you would see interested in discussing. So I see another question. From Bani also, asking about specific projects for livelihood. Megan, can I ask you to maybe briefly address this, and then I'll pass the floor to Ash for the closing remarks. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds fine. And also, I'm happy, my email is on the PowerPoint that will be circulated. So if anyone does want to follow up with questions bilaterally, feel free. But yeah, so for livelihood with women with disabilities. No, we included, very good question. We included them in the Wings project actually later. So, I mean, this was kind of our lessons learned. We made this mistake, I think, at the onset of the project, but then course corrected later. Although it wasn't appropriate for every woman with a disability in the committee to because we only had 2 options of livelihoods actually, but this is something we're really looking to do and to explore better, and even you know, goat rearing and different kinds of suitable livelihood activities that we can diversify a little bit beyond sewing, tailoring, and food processing. Anyway, you just get a market dominated by those things, right? Yeah, and I'm happy to follow up with you bilaterally, no problem.
Thank you, Megan. So, okay, just again, reminder of like suggestions on topics, and if anybody's interested in presenting on disability inclusion in next webinar, come to us, reach out to us. And now I'm just passing the floor to Ash for the closing remarks. Thank you very much all for your participation.
Hi. First of all, thank you, Megan, so much for your insightful presentation, which covered in detail about women's participation, inclusion, setting up women's committees, and the challenges that comes with it. And thank you all for participating in this webinar. So as Amalia mentioned, the next webinar will take place most likely in April, I guess after Easter or early May. And if you would like to be included in the mailing list for the next webinar, if you weren't included in this one, please do send us a message either here or at the participation in displacement working group email, which was in the invitation. That's the same email where you can send us feedback or whatever suggestions for topics for the next few webinars as well. A quick note on the ongoing coronavirus outbreak. We have prepared an advisory equipped with references and links to other essential references. This has been posted on the CCCM cluster website, so please do take a look and take note of the essential measures to take to keep safe and keep healthy. So Megan's presentation brought about some aspects that I think we can all reflect on and take back to our own context, whether we're based in urban, peri-urban, or rural contexts. Women's participation is essential and crucial to understand the needs and gaps and in addressing the concerns of an often marginalized group. Before we end today's webinar and get back to our lives, I would like us to reflect on some aspects that we've learned from the webinar today. So based on this experience in Cox's Bazar, we invite you to reflect on how inclusive are the committees in your areas of work. Do these committees have women and girls with disabilities, adolescents, and do they have a voice? Again, thank you all so much for attending today's webinar. And for those who could not attend, we will be uploading a copy of today's webinar to the displacement website as well as the presentation slides.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Ciao.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.